A millionaire walks into a coffee shop with his new girlfriend and freezes. His ex-wife is there, pregnant, waiting tables alone. When he tries to talk to her, her response leaves him in shock. What happens next reveals a devastating past and the struggle for redemption that could change everything. Where are you watching this video from? Have you ever witnessed such a powerful reunion? Don't miss this moving story that will make you reflect on second chances. Subscribe to our channel and leave a like to continue enjoying stories that touch your heart. Ryan Mackenzie straightened his Italian silk tie as he approached the glass door of the Morning Brew Cafe. The reflection that greeted him showed exactly what he wanted the world to see: success personified. His tailored navy suit hugged his athletic frame, and his recently trimmed hair gave him the polished look of a man who knew his worth. The heavy Rolex on his wrist caught the morning sunlight, sending brief flashes across the cafe's exterior. He pushed the door open, welcoming the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and warm pastries. The cafe hummed with morning conversations, the gentle clinking of ceramic cups against saucers, and the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine. This was his new morning ritual, a quick high-end coffee before heading to the investment firm where he'd recently been promoted to senior partner. "I'll find us a table," said Vanessa, his girlfriend of 6 months, her voice as smooth as her sleek blonde hair. She squeezed his arm affectionately before gliding across the cafe, drawing admiring glances. Ryan approached the counter, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Large Americano, extra shot and a skinny vanilla latte," he said without looking up, his fingers deftly typing a response to his assistant. "That'll be $9.85, came a voice that sliced through him like winter wind. Ryan's head snapped up, his phone suddenly forgotten in his hand. Behind the counter, wearing a simple black apron over a white button-down shirt, stood Jessica, his ex-wife. His throat constricted as their eyes met. Jessica's expression cycled through shock, recognition, and finally settled into a guarded neutrality that didn't reach her eyes. Those hazel eyes that once looked at him with love now regarded him with something between indifference and disdain. "Jessica," he managed, the name feeling both familiar and foreign on his tongue. "Ryan," she responded, her voice professional but cool. $9.85, please." His eyes moved involuntarily from her face to her body, and that's when he saw it, the unmistakable curve of her belly beneath the apron. Jessica was pregnant. The cafe's ambient sounds faded, replaced by the thundering of his heartbeat in his ears. Questions flooded his mind, but they all dissolved on his tongue. Instead, he fumbled with his wallet, nearly dropping it before extracting a $20 bill. "Keep the change," he said hoarsely, his eyes still fixed on her midsection. Jessica's hand moved protectively to her stomach, an instinctual gesture that wasn't lost on Ryan. She turned away to prepare his order, her movements deliberate and precise. Ryan stood frozen, memories crashing over him like waves. Their wedding day, her smile across the dinner table, the tears in her eyes the night she asked for a divorce. The weight of those moments pressed against his chest, making it difficult to breathe in the coffee-scented air. "Order for Ryan," Jessica called, placing 2 paper cups on the counter, avoiding his gaze. "How have you been?" he asked, desperate to break through the wall between them. "I didn't know you were working here, pregnant," Jessica supplied, her voice low but sharp. "There's a lot you don't know, Ryan. That was always the problem, wasn't it?" His phone buzzed persistently in his pocket, probably Vanessa wondering what was taking so long, or maybe the office with another urgent matter that couldn't wait. For the first time in years, Ryan didn't reach for it. "Jessica, your coffee's getting cold," she interrupted, moving to help the next customer. Ryan gathered the cups, feeling the heat through the cardboard sleeves, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in his chest. As he turned toward Vanessa, who was waving from a corner table, he felt as though he were moving through molasses, each step pulling him further from something essential he hadn't realized he'd lost. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about Jessica in the days that followed. Her pregnancy, her working as a barista. It all haunted him. He'd achieved everything he'd worked for, the position, the recognition, the lifestyle, yet the sight of his ex-wife, clearly struggling, had created a fissure in his carefully constructed reality. 1 week after the encounter, he found himself drawn back to the morning brew, this time alone. He arrived during the mid-morning lull, relieved when he didn't see Jessica behind the counter. Instead, an older man with salt-and-pepper hair and kind eyes greeted him. "What can I get you?" the man asked, his voice carrying a slight Italian accent. "Just a black coffee, thanks," Ryan replied, glancing around nervously. The barista nodded, studying Ryan with curious eyes. "You're Jessica's ex-husband, aren't you?" he asked casually while preparing the coffee. Ryan stiffened. "How did you know?" "She was upset after your visit last week." The barista extended his hand. "I'm Marco, by the way. I own this place." Ryan shook his hand automatically. "Ryan Mackenzie." "I know." Marco placed the coffee on the counter. "Jessica doesn't work on Wednesdays, in case you were wondering." "I wasn't," Ryan began, then sighed. "Actually, I was. I was hoping." "How to talk to her?" Marco wiped his hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "She may not want to talk to you. Have you considered that? I just found out she's pregnant and working in a cafe. I don't know what I thought." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Marco gestured to a small table in the corner. "Sit with me for a moment. It's quiet now." Against his better judgment, and definitely against his schedule, Ryan followed Marco to the table. "I've known Jessica for nearly 2 years now," Marco began, his weathered hands cradling his own espresso. "She came here right after your divorce looking for a job, scared but determined. I've watched her build herself back up piece by piece." Ryan's coffee remained untouched, steam rising like the guilt in his chest. "I didn't know things were so difficult for her." Marco's gaze was penetrating. "Did you ever ask?" The question hit Ryan like a slap. Had he? After the divorce was finalized, he'd thrown himself into work even more intensely, climbing the corporate ladder with single-minded focus. Jessica had become a chapter in his life that he'd deliberately closed. "No," Ryan admitted. "I didn't." Marco nodded, as if Ryan had confirmed something he already knew. "You know, I've been married to my Sophia for 43 years. You want to know the secret?" Ryan didn't particularly want relationship advice from a stranger, but he found himself asking, "What is it?" "Presence." Marco tapped the table with his index finger for emphasis. "Not just being in the same room, but truly being there, seeing, hearing, feeling what the other person needs. From what Jessica has shared, you were physically absent often, but even when you were home, you weren't really there." Ryan wanted to defend himself, to explain how hard he'd worked to provide a good life, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he remembered the nights he'd spent working late, the weekends consumed by business trips, the anniversary dinner where he'd spent half the time on the phone. "I thought I was doing what was best," Ryan finally said, his voice barely audible over the cafe's soft background music. Marco's laugh was gentle, but knowing. "Best for whom? Your career? Your ego? Certainly not for your marriage." He leaned forward. "You know what I see when I look at you, Ryan. A man who has everything and nothing at the same time." The words pierced Ryan's carefully constructed armor. He'd defined success by his title, salary and status symbols, never considering what he'd sacrificed to obtain them. "Jessica is due in about 3 months, Marco continued. "She works harder than she should, refuses help, and stays strong for that baby. Whatever you're thinking of doing, fix things, clear your conscience, whatever, make sure it's about her and not about you." Marco stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Your coffee's cold. Let me get you a fresh one. To go." As Ryan left the cafe, coffee in hand, Marco's words echoed in his mind. A man who has everything and nothing at the same time. For the first time in years, Ryan wondered if he'd been measuring success by the wrong metrics all along. Ryan sat in his corner office, staring at the downtown skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. His computer screen displayed quarterly projections that needed his attention, but his mind kept drifting to Jessica and her pregnant belly. Marco's words from 2 days ago had lodged themselves in his thoughts, impossible to dislodge. A knock. On his door preceded his assistant's entrance. "Mr. Mackenzie, your 3 o'clock is waiting in the conference room." "Thanks, Diane. Tell them I'll be there in a minute." After she left, Ryan picked up a framed award on his desk, Investment Strategist of the Year. He'd been so proud when he received it, seeing it as validation of all his sacrifices. Now he wondered what Jessica had been doing that same night. Working at the cafe, alone in an apartment he knew nothing about, discovering she was pregnant. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Are we still on for dinner with the Brightons tonight? Julian might bring up the resort development. Could be huge for you." Ryan texted back a quick confirmation, then grabbed his portfolio for the meeting. As he walked the corridor to the conference room, he passed a wall of company photographs, charity events, award ceremonies, company retreats. In each one, Ryan stood tall, impeccably dressed, the very picture of corporate success. A man who has everything and nothing at the same time. That night, after a dinner filled with strategic conversation and expensive wine, Ryan begged off from Vanessa's invitation to stay the night, claiming early meetings. Instead, he found himself driving to his old neighborhood, parking a block, away from the small colonial home he had once shared with Jessica. The lights were on in what had been their living room, but the curtains were drawn. Did she still live there, or had she sold it after the divorce? He hadn't cared enough to find out, letting his lawyer handle everything, making the split as clean and impersonal as possible. Ryan gripped the steering wheel, suddenly angry, at himself, at Jessica, at the circumstances that had led them here. He had worked tirelessly to build the life he thought they both wanted, and she had thrown it away by demanding more of him than he could give. At least, that's what he'd told himself for the past 2 years. "What do you expect me to do?" he said aloud in the empty car. "Drop everything, turn back time?" He started the engine, but instead of driving away, he found himself pulling out his phone and searching for Jessica's number. He still had it, buried deep in his contacts list. Before he could reconsider, he typed, "I saw you at the cafe last week. I'd like to talk, please." The response came faster than he expected. "There's nothing to talk about. Please don't contact me again." The bluntness of her rejection stung, reigniting his defensiveness. He typed quickly, "You're pregnant and working as a barista. If you need help, I can—" Her reply cut him off. "I don't need your help or your pity. I'm doing fine on my own, just like I have been since you chose your career over our marriage. Good night, Ryan." He almost threw the phone against the passenger window in frustration. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was trying to do the right thing, wasn't he? Or was he, as Marco suggested, just trying to ease his own conscience? Ryan drove home to his luxury apartment, with its pristine surfaces and perfect emptiness. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and walked to the window, looking at the city lights below. In the reflection of the glass, he saw not the successful man he portrayed to the world, but someone hollow, someone who had missed something fundamental about what makes a life worthwhile. He pulled out his phone again and looked at Jessica's final message. "I'm doing fine on my own." But was she? And even if she was, did that absolve him of responsibility? Of the chance to make amends? Ryan finished his scotch in one burning swallow. He wouldn't push tonight, but he wasn't going to walk away either. Something had awakened in him, a recognition of a failure far more significant than any he'd ever faced in business, and unlike in business, where he could simply move on to the next deal. This was a failure he couldn't leave unaddressed. For the first time in years, Ryan Mackenzie was forced to confront not an external challenge, but the person he had become. The reflection staring back at him from the window was a stranger he no longer wanted to be. The following Saturday, Ryan sat in his car outside the Morning Brew for nearly 30 minutes, gathering courage. He'd learned from casual questioning of Marco that Jessica worked weekend mornings. Finally, he entered the cafe, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. Jessica was wiping down tables, her pregnant belly more noticeable than before. In a simple maternity dress beneath her apron, she looked up at the sound of the bell, her expression hardening when she saw him. "We need to talk," Ryan said, approaching her with determination. "I'm working," Jessica replied curtly, moving to the next table. "When do you finish? I can wait." Jessica straightened, one hand instinctively resting on her stomach. Why are you doing this, Ryan? What do you want? The cafe wasn't busy, with only a few customers absorbed in their laptops or conversations. Marco was watching from behind the counter, his expression unreadable. "Just 10 minutes, Ryan pleaded. "Then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want." Jessica glanced at Marco, who gave a subtle nod. "Fine. I have a break in 20 minutes, but not here." 25 minutes later, they sat on a bench in the small park across from the cafe. Fall leaves skittered across the pathway, driven by a cool breeze. Jessica sat as far from Ryan as the bench allowed. "How far along are you?" Ryan asked, breaking the awkward silence. 6 months, Jessica replied, her tone guarded. Ryan did the math quickly. "So, after the divorce, yes," Jessica's voice remained steady. "I started seeing someone about 3 months after. It didn't work out." "Does he know?" The father. Jessica's laugh was bitter. "Oh, he knows. He made it very clear he wasn't interested in being a father." She turned to face Ryan directly. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" Ryan had rehearsed this conversation in his mind, but now his prepared words felt inadequate. "I want to help," he said finally. "Help?" Jessica repeated incredulously. "Now you want to help? Where was this helpful attitude when we were married? And I needed you. When I was crying myself to sleep because my husband couldn't be bothered to come home for our anniversary. When I tried for months to tell you how unhappy I was, but you were always too busy for a real conversation." Each question landed like a blow, and Ryan had no defense. She was right about all of it. "I made mistakes," he admitted quietly. "Mistakes?" Jessica shook her head. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. What you did was a choice, Ryan. Every day you chose your work over our marriage." "I thought I was building a future for us," Ryan said, hearing the weakness in his own excuse. "No, you were building a future for yourself that you assumed I would fit into." Jessica stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Look, I appreciate that you feel bad seeing me like this, but I don't need your guilt money or your sudden concern. I'm making it work on my own." As she turned to leave, Ryan noticed how tired she looked, the dark circles under her eyes, the slight droop of her shoulders. "Are you really?" he asked softly. "Making it work?" Jessica paused, her back to him. "I have to get back to work." "Jessica," Ryan called after her, "at least let me give you my new number in case you ever need anything." To his surprise, she turned and held out her hand for his phone. She inputted her number and handed it back. "Don't make me regret this," she warned before walking away. It wasn't much, just 10 tense minutes and a phone number, but as Ryan watched her return to the cafe, it felt like the first real step he'd taken in years. 2 weeks passed with no contact between Ryan and Jessica. He had drafted countless messages, only to delete them, unsure of what to say or how to say it. Meanwhile, he began the difficult process of examining his life and choices. He started with Vanessa. Over dinner at her favorite restaurant, he explained that he couldn't continue their relationship. "Is there someone else?" she asked, more annoyed than heartbroken. "No," Ryan answered honestly, "but I need to sort some things out." Vanessa studied him across the table. "It's your ex-wife, isn't it? The pregnant one from the cafe." Ryan's surprise must have shown on his face. "Please," Vanessa said with a dismissive wave. "I saw how you looked at her, like you'd seen a ghost." She gathered her purse. "Good luck with that mess. You'll be calling me in a month when you remember why you divorced her in the first place." After Vanessa left, Ryan sat alone finishing his wine. He wasn't sure what he expected to feel, regret perhaps or sadness, but all he felt was a strange lightness, as if he'd set down a heavy suitcase he'd been carrying for too long. The following day, Ryan approached his firm's managing partner and requested a reduction in his client load. "I need to rebalance some personal priorities," he explained. The older man's eyebrows shot up. "You're our hardest worker, Mackenzie. Never heard you talk about balance before." "I'm not quitting or stepping back permanently," Ryan clarified. "I just need some flexibility right now." His request was granted, albeit with visible confusion from colleagues who had never known Ryan to be anything but completely dedicated to work. With his newly freed time, Ryan began researching. He read books about pregnancy and childbirth, joined online forums for divorced parents, and even attended a seminar on co-parenting after separation. He wasn't sure where he fit into Jessica's life or her child's, but he was determined to be prepared for any role she might allow him. Then one evening, his phone lit up with a message from Jessica. "I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow that I can't reschedule, but Marco can't cover my shift. I might lose my job. I know it's asking a lot, but do you know anyone who could cover for me? 3 hours, simple coffee shop work." Ryan responded immediately. "I can do it. What time?" There was a long pause before Jessica replied, "Are you serious? It's not exactly your scene." "What time?" Ryan repeated. 9 a.m. But Ryan, have you ever even made coffee for yourself, let alone customers? I'll figure it out. See you at 9. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the morning brew at 8:30, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit. Marco laughed when he saw him, but agreed to give him a crash course in barista basics. "Here to impress Jessica, eh?" Marco teased as he showed Ryan how to operate the espresso machine. "Here to help," Ryan corrected. "She doesn't even need to know I was the one who covered." Marco gave him a knowing look. "She'll know, and she'll pretend it doesn't matter. But it will." By 8:55, Ryan had mastered the fundamentals, enough to fumble through simple orders at least. When Jessica arrived, dressed for her appointment in a simple maternity dress, she stopped short at the sight of Ryan behind the counter. "You actually came," she said, clearly surprised. "I said I would." Ryan handed a customer their change. "Go to your appointment. We've got this covered." Jessica hesitated, looking between Ryan and Marco. "You don't have to do this." "I know I don't have to," Ryan replied. "I want to." Something shifted in Jessica's expression, not quite softening, but a slight easing of her guard. "Thank you," she said simply before leaving. The 3 hours that followed were some of the most challenging of Ryan's professional life. He mixed up orders, spilled milk, and burned his hand on the steam wand. But by the end, he had developed a newfound respect for the work Jessica did daily while pregnant. When she returned, Ryan was wiping down the counter, his shirt stained with coffee and his hair disheveled. "How was your appointment?" he asked casually. Jessica watched him for a moment. "Everything's good. Healthy baby." She paused. "How was your morning as a barista?" "Humbling," Ryan admitted with a tired smile. "I think I owe you and Marco a raise." A small laugh escaped Jessica, the first he'd heard since they'd reconnected, and the sound pierced through Ryan's chest with an ache of remembrance. He'd once made her laugh every day. "Thank you," Jessica said again, more warmly this time. "It really helped." As Ryan prepared to leave, Jessica called after him. "Ryan, I have another appointment next week. A sonogram. They're going to determine the gender." She hesitated, then added, "If you wanted to come," it wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was an opening, a small crack in the wall between them. Ryan nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. As he walked to his car, still wearing his coffee-stained clothes, Ryan felt more satisfaction than he had after closing his biggest deal. "It's a boy," the technician announced, moving the ultrasound wand across Jessica's belly. Ryan, sitting awkwardly in a chair beside the examination table, felt his breath catch at the grainy image on the screen. A baby. A real baby with a discernible head, body, and tiny moving limbs. "Would you like to know if the father is in the room?" the technician asked Jessica with a smile. An uncomfortable silence fell. Jessica cleared her throat. "He's not. This is my ex-husband." The technician's smile faltered. "Oh, I'm sorry. I just assumed—" "It's fine," Jessica said quickly. Ryan kept his eyes fixed on the screen, pretending not to notice the technician's embarrassment or Jessica's discomfort. But inside, an unexpected emotion surged through him, a bizarre sense of loss for a child that had never been his. After the appointment, they walked to the parking lot in silence. The November air was crisp, carrying the scent of impending winter. "Thank you for letting me come," Ryan finally said as they reached Jessica's car, the same modest sedan she'd had during their marriage. Jessica nodded, keys in hand. "I figured since you've been hanging around and helping out, you might as well see what all the fuss is about." Her attempt at lightness fell flat, and she sighed. "I don't know why I invited you, honestly." "Because having someone with you is better than being alone," Ryan suggested quietly. Jessica looked up at him, her expression softening slightly. "Maybe." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you want to get some lunch?" "I'm starving, and apparently growing a human requires constant feeding." They ended up at a small diner near the hospital, sitting across from each other in a booth by the window. Jessica ordered a BLT with extra bacon and a chocolate milkshake, while Ryan chose a club sandwich, suddenly not very hungry. "So," Jessica said after their food arrived, boy, have you thought about names?" Ryan asked. "Ethan," Jessica replied without hesitation. "Ethan James." "That's a good name," Ryan said, remembering how they had once playfully discussed baby names during the early years of their marriage. Jessica had always favored traditional names with personal meaning. "James was my grandfather's name," Jessica explained, though Ryan already knew this. "He raised me after my parents died. He was the most dependable man I've ever known." The implication hung in the air between them. Unlike Ryan, Grandfather James had been someone Jessica could count on. "I visited your mother last week," Jessica said suddenly. Ryan nearly choked on his water. "What? Why?" Jessica shrugged, stirring her milkshake with the straw. "I ran into her at the grocery store. She invited me for tea." Ryan hadn't spoken to his mother in months, their relationship having grown distant as he climbed the corporate ladder. "What did you talk about?" "You mostly," Jessica admitted. "She's worried about you, says you never call, never visit." Guilt twisted in Ryan's stomach. His neglect had extended beyond his marriage, it seemed. "She showed me pictures of you as a little boy," Jessica continued. "You had this stuffed lion you carried everywhere. She said you couldn't sleep without it." Ryan remembered the lion. Leo, he'd called it. The memory felt like it belonged to another person entirely. "I was thinking," Jessica said, her voice hesitant, "maybe you could talk to your mom about some of your old baby things. For Ethan. If you want to, I mean. It would save me some money, and recycling is better for the environment anyway." The request was practical, logical even, but Ryan recognized it for what it was, an olive branch, offered tentatively. "Of course," he agreed immediately. "I'll call her tonight." As they finished their meal, the conversation shifted to safer topics. Marco's latest batch of experimental biscotti, the cafe's upcoming holiday promotions, a funny regular customer, who always ordered his coffee in rhyming couplets. When they parted in the parking lot, Ryan felt an inexplicable urge to reach out, to touch Jessica's arm, or even to embrace her. Instead, he shoved his hands into his pockets. "Let me know if you need anything," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. Jessica regarded him thoughtfully. "You know, Ryan, for years I wondered if the man I married was still in there somewhere, beneath all the ambition and business jargon." She placed a hand on her rounded belly. "I'm still not sure, but I see glimpses sometimes." With that, she got into her car and drove away, leaving Ryan standing in the parking lot, wondering if those glimpses were enough, and if the man he once was, or perhaps a better version of him, could somehow find his way back to the surface permanently. December arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if winter were hesitating to fully commit. Ryan had established a careful routine of checking in on Jessica without overwhelming her, helping at the cafe occasionally, driving her to doctor's appointments, and delivering boxes of his old baby clothes and toys from his mother's attic. Their interactions remained cordial but guarded, with Jessica maintaining clear boundaries. She accepted his help, but repeatedly emphasized that she didn't need to depend on him. "I'm not your responsibility," became her refrain. Ryan respected her boundaries while quietly continuing to look for ways to support her. He, anonymously, paid for her next 3 months of rent through her landlord and arranged for grocery deliveries that he pretended were promotional gifts from the store. Small things, he told himself, to make her life a little easier. Then came the company holiday party, a lavish affair at an upscale hotel downtown. Ryan attended out of obligation, making polite conversation with colleagues while declining the drinks that flowed freely. He was preparing to make an early exit when his managing partner cornered him. "Mackenzie, we need to talk about your performance lately," the older man said, swirling his scotch. "The Brighton account is unhappy. They say you're distracted, missing opportunities." "I've been dealing with some personal matters," Ryan explained. "But everything's under control. I'll smooth things over with the Brightons." "See that you do," his boss replied. "We've been patient with this work-life balance experiment of yours, but remember what got you where you are. This firm rewards dedication." The message was clear: return to his former work habits or risk losing everything he'd built. As Ryan drove home, conflict raged within him. He'd worked tirelessly for his position, sacrificing years to climb the ladder. Could he really throw that away? And for what? A tentative connection with his ex-wife and her unborn child? His phone rang, cutting through his thoughts. Jessica's name flashed on the screen. "Ryan?" Her voice sounded strained. "I hate to ask, but I think I need to go to the hospital." Ryan's heart raced. "What's wrong?" "I've been having contractions for a few hours. They're probably just Braxton Hicks, false labor. But they're getting more painful and the doctor wants me to come in to be safe." "Where are you?" Ryan asked, already changing direction. "At home. I called Sarah, but she's out of town. And Marco's visiting family in Chicago, and I'll be there in 15 minutes, Ryan assured her, pressing harder on the accelerator. He arrived in 12, finding Jessica sitting on her porch steps, a small overnight bag beside her. Her face was pale, her breathing controlled but clearly managing pain. "Let's go," Ryan said, taking her bag and helping her to his car. The hospital. They were immediately taken to labor and delivery, where a doctor confirmed Jessica was experiencing false labor, likely triggered by dehydration and stress. "You're not in actual labor," the doctor explained, "but we'd like to keep you overnight for observation and to get some fluids into you. The baby looks fine, but we don't want to take any chances at 32 weeks. After Jessica was settled in a room, hooked up to monitors and an IV, Ryan sat in the chair beside her bed, his tie loosened and jacket draped over the back of the chair. "You don't have to stay," Jessica told him. "I'm fine now." "I'm staying," Ryan said simply. Jessica studied him. "You're dressed up. Did I interrupt something important?" "Just the company holiday party. Nothing important." Jessica's eyes widened. "The holiday party? Ryan, that's the biggest networking event of the year for your firm. You always said it was where the real business happened." "It's just a party," Ryan shrugged, though they both knew it was more than that. Jessica's face clouded. "I don't want your pity, Ryan, and I don't want to be the reason you throw away your career." "Is that what you think, that I pity you?" Ryan leaned forward, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Jessica, I've been trying for months to show you that I've changed, that I understand how badly I messed up. This isn't about pity, it's about finally getting my priorities straight." "After 2 years," Jessica countered. "After the divorce is final and I'm having another man's baby? Now you suddenly care about priorities." "Yes, now." Ryan stood, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what matters." Jessica winced suddenly, placing a hand on her belly. The monitor beside her beeped as a contraction registered. Ryan immediately regretted raising his voice. "I'm sorry. You need to stay calm." "Don't tell me what I need," Jessica snapped, then closed her eyes, taking deep breaths until the contraction passed. When she opened them again, tears glistened. "What do you want from me, Ryan? Forgiveness? Reconciliation? A gold star for finally being a decent human being?" The question pierced him. What did he want? He hadn't allowed himself to examine his motivations too closely, afraid of what he might find. "I just want to be here," he said finally. "No agenda, no expectations, just here." Jessica turned her face away, but not before Ryan caught the tear sliding down her cheek. "That's what I always wanted from you," she whispered. "Just for you to be there." Ryan sat back down, the weight of her words settling over him. They remained in silence as the monitors beeped steadily, measuring the heartbeats of both Jessica and the baby boy she carried, a child conceived in the aftermath of their broken marriage, yet somehow pulling them back into each other's orbit. Outside the hospital window, snow had begun to fall, the year's first flakes drifting lazily past the glass, a gentle reminder that even the longest delay must eventually give way to inevitability. The day after Jessica's hospital scare, Ryan faced a crisis of his own. The Brighton account, one of the firm's largest clients, had requested a meeting with the managing partners and explicitly asked that Ryan not attend. "They're considering taking their business elsewhere," his boss informed him grimly. "They say you've been unreliable, distracted, missing calls, showing up unprepared for meetings." Ryan couldn't deny it. In the weeks since reconnecting with Jessica, his work had slipped from its usual meticulous standard. His mind was often elsewhere, wondering how she was feeling, whether she needed anything, what the future might hold. "I can fix this," Ryan promised. "Give me a chance to meet with Julian Brighton personally. I've known him for years." His boss sighed. "That's just it, Mackenzie. Julian specifically said, and I quote, 'Ryan's not the same guy we signed with 2 years ago.' What's going on with you? Is it a health issue? Something we should know about?" Ryan hesitated. In the culture of his firm, personal problems were private concerns, expected to be managed without affecting performance. Mentioning his situation with Jessica would sound like an excuse or worse, a liability. "I've had some personal matters to attend to," he said vaguely. "They're being resolved." "Good." His boss nodded. "Because we need the old Ryan back. The one who closed impossible deals and never let anything get in the way of business." He slid a folder across the desk. "The Brightons are giving us one more chance. They're launching a new resort development in Bali. The meeting's next week." "In Indonesia?" Ryan stared at the folder. "Next week, for how long?" 10 days minimum. Through Christmas, you leave Monday." His boss stood, signaling the end of the discussion. "Fix this, Ryan. Your future here depends on it." Ryan left the office in a daze. The assignment was both a punishment and an opportunity, a chance to redeem himself professionally, but at what cost? Jessica was due in less than 2 months. "Trust me, we need natural light." Ryan smiled at the "we" but didn't comment on it. Instead, he dutifully moved the half-assembled changing table to the window. 3 weeks had passed since his decision to turn down the Bali trip, and in that time a tentative rhythm had developed between them. He visited regularly, helping prepare for the baby and taking Jessica to her appointments. His career had indeed taken a hit. He'd been relegated to managing smaller accounts and working on team projects rather than leading them. The reduction in status would have devastated him before, but now he found himself surprisingly unbothered. The extra time had allowed him not only to help Jessica, but also to reconnect with friends and family he'd neglected for years. "Hand me that screwdriver," Ryan said, gesturing toward the toolbox. Jessica passed it to him, then lowered herself, carefully onto the rocking chair, the only fully assembled piece of furniture in the room. At nearly 8 months pregnant, her movements had become deliberately measured. "How's work?" she asked. Ryan shrugged. "Different, quieter. I'm home by 6 most days." "Do you miss it? The high-pressure deals, the late nights?" "Sometimes," Ryan admitted, fitting pieces of the changing table together. "I was good at it. It felt good to be good at something." He glanced up at her. "But I don't miss who I was becoming." Jessica nodded, rocking gently. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, who we become without noticing." She ran a hand over her belly. "When I found out I was pregnant after Greg left, I was terrified, not just of being a single mother, but of becoming bitter, resentful. It was the first time she'd mentioned the baby's father by name, and Ryan tried to keep his expression neutral. "Have you heard from him?" "He sent me an email last month, asking me not to contact him for child support." Jessica's laugh was hollow. "As if I would." Ryan tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. "He doesn't deserve to be Ethan's father." "Maybe not," Jessica agreed softly. "But he is. Biologically, at least." She watched Ryan work for a moment before adding, "You know, these past few weeks you've been more present than you were for entire years of our marriage." The observation stung, but Ryan couldn't deny its truth. I know. I wish I could go back and change that. We can't go back, Jessica said simply. But sometimes I wonder, if you had been like this then, would we still be together? The question hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities. Ryan set down the screwdriver and looked directly at her. Yes, he said without hesitation, we would be. Jessica held his gaze, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. It's strange, isn't it? How losing everything can be the thing that saves you. They worked in companionable silence after that, assembling the crib and arranging stuffed animals on shelves. By late afternoon, the nursery had transformed from a chaos of boxes and parts to a cohesive room ready to welcome a new life. What do you think? Ryan asked, standing back to survey their work. Jessica moved slowly around the room, touching the crib rail, straightening a picture frame, adjusting a stuffed elephant on a shelf. It's perfect, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Ryan. I have one more thing, he said, retrieving a package from the hallway. He handed it to Jessica, suddenly nervous. I saw it and thought of you, of Ethan. Jessica unwrapped the package to reveal a small, well-worn stuffed lion with a slightly matted mane and one eye that didn't quite match the other. Leo, she whispered, recognizing the toy from the photos his mother had shown her. My mum kept him all these years, Ryan explained. I thought maybe Ethan might like him. He helped me sleep through some pretty rough nights when I was a kid. Jessica clutched the lion to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. This means a lot, she said softly. Then, impulsively, she stepped forward and hugged Ryan. It was their first physical contact beyond casual assistance, and Ryan froze momentarily, before carefully wrapping his arms around her, mindful of her belly between them. She smelled the same as she always had, like vanilla and something uniquely her, and the familiarity of it made his chest ache. When they separated, both were slightly flustered. I should go, Ryan said, glancing at his watch. You need to rest. Actually, Jessica said hesitantly, I was going to order pizza. Would you like to stay for dinner? It's the least I can do after you spent all day building furniture. It was a small invitation, but it felt monumental. I'd like that, Ryan replied, trying not to sound too eager. As they sat later on Jessica's couch, eating pizza and watching a mindless comedy, Ryan was struck by how ordinary and yet how extraordinary the moment was. She'd been experiencing false contractions. The doctor had warned that bed rest might become necessary if they continued. Back at his apartment, Ryan poured himself a drink and called the one person who had always given him honest advice, even when he hadn't wanted to hear it. Mom, it's me. His mother's surprise was evident. Ryan, is everything all right? You never call on a weekday. The concern in her voice made him wince with guilt. I'm sorry about that. I should call more often. Yes, you should, she agreed, without judgment. Jessica told me you've been helping her. I'm proud of you for that. Her simple approval warmed him unexpectedly. That's actually why I'm calling. I need some advice. He explained the situation. His job hanging in the balance, the crucial business trip, his concerns about leaving Jessica. His mother was quiet for a moment before responding. You know, when your father died, you were only 12. I had to make a similar choice. Ryan's memory of that time was hazy, grief overshadowing details. The advertising agency offered me a promotion, but it would have meant traveling every other week. It was more money, more prestige. But you turned... Tie it down, Ryan remembered suddenly. Yes, she confirmed, because I realized you needed me more than I needed that job. I chose presence over ambition. And you never regretted it? Ryan asked. His mother's laugh was gentle. Oh, I regretted it sometimes, when money was tight, or when I saw former colleagues advancing beyond me. But not when it mattered. Not when I was there for your first heartbreak or your high school graduation, or when you needed someone to talk to at midnight. Ryan swirled the ice in his glass. This is different, though. Jessica isn't my wife anymore. The baby isn't mine. Isn't it? His mother challenged. Different, I mean. You're facing the same fundamental question I did. What kind of person do you want to be? Someone who shows up or someone who chases the next opportunity? After they hung up, Ryan sat with her words. The old Ryan, the one his firm wanted back, would already be packing for Bali, rationalizing that his career was the priority, that Ryan would promise to make it up to Jessica later, somehow, but that Ryan had lost her in the first place. His phone pinged with a text from Jessica. "Thanks again for yesterday. Doctor says everything looks normal now, but I need to reduce stress and work hours. Not sure how I'm going to manage that." Ryan stared at his phone, then at the folder containing the Bali resort details. In that moment, the crossroads before him seemed blindingly clear. The next morning, Ryan walked into his boss's office without an appointment. "I can't go to Bali," he announced. His boss looked up, incredulous. "Excuse me?" "I'm sorry, but I can't be gone for 10 days right now. Someone I care about needs me here." Ryan placed the folder on the desk. "I understand if this affects my position with the firm." The older man leaned back, studying Ryan with narrowed eyes. "You're turning down the chance to save the Brighton account, to save your career here, for a personal matter." "Yes," Ryan said, and was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. His boss shook his head. "I never thought I'd see the day. Ryan Mackenzie choosing something over work." He sighed heavily. "You've earned enough goodwill here that I won't demand your resignation today. But understand this. You're being moved off primary accounts until you demonstrate that your commitment has returned." "I understand," Ryan said, accepting the demotion with a calmness that would have been unthinkable to him months ago. As he left the office building that had been the center of his universe for so long, Ryan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he had made a choice not calculated for maximum professional advantage, but based on what felt fundamentally right. He called Jessica from the car. "How are you feeling?" he asked when she answered. "Better today," she replied. "Did you need something?" "Actually," Ryan said, "I was wondering if you'd let me help you set up the nursery this weekend. You mentioned needing to reduce your activity level, and I have some unexpected free time." There was a pause before Jessica responded, her voice cautious but not unwelcoming. "I'd like that. Thank you." Ryan smiled as he drove, realizing he felt no regret for the choice he'd made. The old Ryan might have seen it as a sacrifice, but to the man he was becoming, it felt more like a step toward something better. "That's not where the changing table goes," Jessica said, watching from the doorway as Ryan assembled furniture in what would soon be Ethan's nursery. "It should be under the window." Ryan wiped sweat from his brow. "The instructions show it. Against this wall." "The instructions weren't written by someone who's going to be changing diapers at 3 a.m., Jessica countered. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have recognized the value in such simple companionship. Now he couldn't imagine anything more worthwhile. "What are you thinking about?" Jessica asked, catching him watching her. Ryan smiled. "Just that I'm exactly where I want to be." And for the first time in as long as he could remember, it was absolutely true. "You're looking well, Jessica," Dr. Chen said, reviewing the chart at what had become their weekly checkup. "Blood pressure's normal, weight gain is right on track, and Ethan's heartbeat is strong." Jessica smiled, relief evident on her face. After the scare with false labor, every positive report felt like crossing another hurdle. "Any more contractions?" the doctor asked. "Just a few Braxton Hicks, but nothing like before," Jessica replied. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Good. And you've been taking it easy? Limited work hours like we discussed?" "Yes," Jessica confirmed. "I'm down to 3 short shifts a week at the cafe and—" She hesitated, glancing at Ryan, who sat quietly in the corner of the examination room. "I've had help with everything else." Dr. Chen followed her gaze to Ryan and smiled. "Excellent. Support systems are crucial, especially for first-time mothers." She made a note in the chart. "You're at 36 weeks now. Ethan could safely arrive any time, though full term is 40 weeks. Let's schedule your next appointment for next week, and then we'll move to twice weekly until delivery." As they left the doctor's office, Ryan held the door for Jessica, who moved with the careful waddle of late pregnancy. "Want to grab lunch?" he asked as they reached the parking lot. Jessica checked her watch. "I can't today. I'm meeting Sarah at the cafe. At 1. "Your sister's in town?" Ryan tried to keep his tone casual. Sarah had never been his biggest fan, and he imagined her opinion of him had only deteriorated since the divorce. "Just for the weekend," Jessica confirmed. "She wants to see the nursery and help with last-minute preparations." Ryan nodded, trying not to show his disappointment. Over the past weeks, he and Jessica had fallen into a comfortable routine that included regular meals together. "Rain check, then." Jessica studied him for a moment. "You could join us if you want." The invitation surprised him. "Are you sure? Sarah doesn't exactly... She doesn't exactly think you're God's gift to humanity," Jessica finished with a small smile. "But she knows you've been helping. It might be good for you two to talk." Ryan doubted that, but he found himself agreeing anyway. 2 hours later, he walked into the morning brew, immediately spotting Jessica and Sarah at a corner table. Sarah, with her sharp features and protective demeanor, looked up as he approached, her expression guarded. "Ryan," she acknowledged coolly. "Jessica mentioned you might join us." "Sarah," he returned with a nod. "Good to see you." Jessica glanced between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Ryan's been helping me set up the nursery," she said, an obvious attempt to establish neutral territory. "So I've heard," Sarah replied, stirring her coffee. "Quite the transformation from the workaholic who couldn't make it to his own anniversary dinner." "Sarah," Jessica warned. "No, it's okay," Ryan said, holding up a hand. "She's right." Turned to Sarah directly. "I wasn't a good husband to your sister. I put my career above our marriage and I hurt her deeply. I don't expect you to forget that or to trust me right away." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly at his directness. "And yet you're suddenly back in her life, playing the hero, just when she's vulnerable and preparing for single motherhood. Convenient. Timing." "It wasn't planned," Ryan said. "Running into Jessica at the cafe was pure coincidence, but seeing her again, realizing what I'd lost, it forced me to confront who I'd become." Sarah's skepticism was palpable. "And we're supposed to believe you've had some magical personality transplant, that the man who couldn't be bothered to call his wife when he was working late is now ready to be there for her." "I don't expect you to believe anything," Ryan answered. "I'm just trying to be there for Jessica now in whatever way she needs. The rest is up to her." A silence fell over the table, broken only when Marco appeared with a tray of pastries. "On the house," he announced, setting them down, "for the mother-to-be and her support team." He winked at Ryan before returning to the counter. Sarah reached for a scone, eyeing Ryan thoughtfully. "Jessica tells me you declined a major business trip to help her." Ryan nodded. "Bali. 10 days. And cost yourself a promotion in the process." "A demotion, actually," Ryan corrected. "But it was worth it." Sarah turned to Jessica. "And you? How do you feel about all this?" Jessica, who had been quietly observing their exchange, fiddled with her napkin. Confused sometimes, grateful, cautious. She looked up at Ryan, but not unhappy. "And the ex-boyfriend, Greg?" Sarah asked. "Any contact from him?" Jessica shook her head. "None since that email. He's made his position clear." Sarah's expression softened as she looked at her sister. "You know Mum and Dad would have loved to be here for this. Dad would have been knitting baby blankets by the dozen." Jessica smiled at the memory of their parents, who had died in a car accident shortly before she met Ryan. "I know." Ryan, feeling like an intruder on this private moment, began to rise. "Maybe I should go and let you two catch up." "Sit," Sarah commanded, surprisingly firm. "If you're going to be in my sister's life, in my nephew's life, we need to establish some ground rules." For the next hour, the three of them talked, really talked. Sarah asked pointed questions about Ryan's intentions, his work situation, his plans for the future. Ryan answered honestly, without defensiveness, understanding her need to protect her sister. By the time they parted, Ryan felt as though he'd passed some crucial examination. Sarah's final words to him, spoken privately as Jessica visited the restroom, confirmed it. "I'm still watching you," she warned. "But I think you might actually mean it this time." Coming from Sarah, it was practically a benediction. That evening, Ryan called Jessica to check in, as had become his habit. "Everything okay with Sarah?" he asked. "She's Sarah," Jessica replied, and Ryan could hear the smile in her voice. Protective, opinionated, completely loyal. She loves you, Ryan said simply. Yes, Jessica agreed, and she's starting to think you might too. The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. Ryan, Jessica said after a moment, thank you for today, for facing Sarah, for being honest about the past. I'm trying to be honest about everything these days, Ryan replied. It's easier than I thought it would be. Honesty usually is, Jessica said softly. It's the lies we tell ourselves that are the hardest to maintain. After they said goodnight, Ryan sat in his apartment, thinking about Jessica's words. For years he'd told himself that his priorities made sense, that success would bring happiness, that there would always be time later for the things that mattered. How easily those lies had collapsed when confronted with the reality of Jessica's absence from his life and the possibility of her return. Ryan spent Christmas Eve alone, declining an invitation from colleagues and another from his mother, who had decided to visit her sister in Florida. Jessica and Sarah had a tradition of spending the holiday together, and Ryan didn't want to intrude, despite Jessica's tentative suggestion that he might join them for dessert. Your family, he'd told her. Take the time with Sarah. I'll see you on the 26th to help put together that bookshelf we forgot. So he found himself in his apartment, a small pre-lit tree in the corner, casting multicolored reflections on the window that overlooked the city. He'd ordered Chinese food and opened a bottle of wine, settling in for a quiet evening with a book he'd been meaning to read for months. The knock on his door at 8:45 p.m. was unexpected. When he opened it, Jessica stood there wrapped in a winter coat, snowflakes melting in her hair. Jessica, is everything okay? The baby is fine, she assured him quickly. Everything's fine. Sarah fell asleep watching It's a Wonderful Life, and I wanted to give you this. She handed him a wrapped package. Merry Christmas. Ryan was momentarily speechless. Come in, he finally managed. It's freezing out there. Jessica stepped inside, looking around curiously. She had never been to his new apartment. It's nice, she said, though her tone suggested she found it rather sterile. Very you. It came furnished, Ryan explained, suddenly seeing the place through her eyes. The impersonal decor, the minimal signs of actual living. I never really bothered to change anything. Jessica nodded, unzipping her coat but not removing it. Her pregnancy had progressed to the point where even winter outerwear strained to close over her belly. Aren't you going to open it? Ryan looked down at the gift in his hands, wrapped in paper decorated with cartoon reindeer. He carefully removed the wrapping to reveal a photo album bound in soft leather. Open it, Jessica encouraged, a hint of nervousness in her voice. The first page contained a sonogram image, Ethan at 20 weeks, according to the neat caption beneath. The following pages held more images tracking the baby's development, interspersed with photos of the nursery coming together, Jessica's growing belly, and even a few snapshots of Ryan himself, captured without his knowledge as he assembled furniture or carried grocery bags. Jessica, this is... Ryan swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. I wanted you to have a record, Jessica explained, of this time of Ethan. She hesitated. I left space in the back for after he's born. The implication was clear. She expected Ryan to be part of their lives even after Ethan arrived. It was the most concrete acknowledgement yet of whatever was rebuilding between them. I have something for you too, Ryan said, setting the album carefully on the coffee table. He retrieved a small box from beneath his modest tree. It's not much, but... Jessica unwrapped it to reveal a silver charm bracelet with a single charm, a tiny lion, remarkably similar to the stuffed Leo now residing in Ethan's crib. It's beautiful, Jessica breathed, turning the charm between her fingers. I thought you could add charms for different milestones, Ryan explained. Ethan's birth, his first steps, first day of school. Jessica smiled, a hint of teasing in her eyes. You've become quite sentimental, Ryan Mackenzie. I'm learning, he admitted. Would you like some tea? Or hot chocolate? I actually have both now. Jessica laughed. The man who once subsisted Entirely on takeout and Scotch now stocks hot chocolate. I'm impressed. They settled in the living room, Jessica finally removing her coat as Ryan prepared the drinks. The domesticity of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. "How's Sarah?" Ryan asked, handing Jessica a mug of hot chocolate. "Good. Skeptical still, but coming around." Jessica cradled the mug in both hands. "She says you seem different." "More human," Ryan smiled wryly. High praise from Sarah. They sipped their drinks in comfortable silence for a moment before Jessica spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately." Ryan set his mug down carefully. "Oh, not just forgiving you," Jessica clarified, "but forgiving myself too, for not speaking up sooner when I was unhappy, for expecting you to read my mind, for giving up instead of fighting harder." "Jessica, no," Ryan shook his head. "You tried. God, you tried so many times to tell me what was wrong and I just didn't listen." "Maybe," Jessica conceded. "But I'm not entirely blameless. I knew who you were when I married you, ambitious, driven. I thought those qualities would serve our marriage, not compete with it." She sighed. "What I'm trying to say is, I think I'm ready to let go of the hurt. Not forget it, but not be defined by it anymore." Ryan reached across the space between them and took her hand. "I never deserved you. Not then, and probably not now either." "That's not how love works," Jessica said softly. "It's not about deserving." The word love hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly nor dismissing it. "Would you show me the rest of the place?" Jessica asked, changing the subject. Ryan gave her the brief tour: kitchen, bathroom, his Spartan bedroom with its magnificent view but complete lack of personal touches. "It's a nice apartment," Jessica observed as they returned to the living room, "but it doesn't feel like a home." "No," Ryan agreed, "it never has." When Jessica finally prepared to leave, the night having grown late, Ryan helped her with her coat. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, "and for the album. It means more than I can say." Jessica turned to face him, closer than they'd been in a long time. "I'm glad you like it." In that moment, with snowflakes still falling outside and Christmas lights twinkling in the corner, Ryan felt an overwhelming urge to kiss her. From the way Jessica's gaze briefly dropped to his lips, he wondered if she felt it too. Instead, he stepped back, respecting the delicate balance they'd established. "Text me when you get home, just so I know you're safe." Jessica nodded, a mix of emotions crossing her face. "Merry Christmas, Ryan." "Merry Christmas, Jessica." After she left, Ryan returned to the photo album, paging through it slowly, tracing the evidence of a journey he hadn't expected to take, but now couldn't imagine not being part of. On the final page, Jessica had written a simple message: "For the man who learned to be present, thank you for showing up." Ryan closed the album carefully, holding it against his chest. Outside, the city was blanketed in white, transformed into something pure and new, not unlike the second chance he'd been given, against all odds and expectations. On a frigid January morning, 3 weeks before Jessica's due date, Ryan's phone rang at 3:42 a.m. "Ryan?" Jessica's voice was tense, breathless. "My water broke. The contractions are 5 minutes apart. I need to go to the hospital now." Ryan was already out of bed, searching for clothes in the dark. "I'm on my way. Do you have your hospital bag?" "By the front door," Jessica confirmed, then inhaled sharply. "Oh God, that one hurt." "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Ryan promised, grabbing his keys. "Just breathe, Jess, I'm coming." The roads were mercifully empty at that hour, allowing Ryan to make the drive in 12 minutes flat. When Jessica opened her door, her face was pale, her hair hastily pulled back, and her expression a mixture of pain and fear. "Thank you for coming," she said, then doubled over as another contraction hit. Ryan guided her to his car, the hospital bag slung over his shoulder. "I'm driving, you're breathing," he instructed gently. "We've got this." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of timed contractions and reassurances. When they arrived, at the maternity ward, everything accelerated. Jessica was quickly evaluated, determined to be in active labor, and admitted. "You're progressing quickly," the nurse informed them. "Especially for a first baby. Are you the father?" she asked Ryan. Before he could respond, Jessica gripped his hand painfully. "He's with me," she said firmly. "That's all that matters." The hours that followed tested them both. Jessica's labor intensified rapidly, the contractions coming harder and closer together. Ryan stayed by her side, wiping her brow, offering ice chips, and letting her crush his hand during the worst of the pain. "I can't do this," Jessica gasped, during a particularly brutal contraction. "It's too much." "You can," Ryan assured her, his voice steady, even as his heart raced with concern. "You're the strongest person I know, Jessica. You've got this. Ethan's almost here." When the time came to push, Jessica looked at Ryan with panic in her eyes. "Don't leave me," she pleaded. "Never again," he promised, the words carrying weight beyond the current moment. At 11:27 a.m., after nearly 8 hours of labor, James came into the world with a powerful cry that filled the delivery room. The doctor placed him immediately on Jessica's chest, where he quieted, blinking up at his mother with unfocused eyes. "He's perfect," Jessica whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Ryan, look at him." Ryan stared at the tiny human being, red-faced, wrinkled with a shock of dark hair, and felt something break open inside him. He had thought he understood love before, but this was something else entirely. "He's beautiful," he managed, his own vision blurring with tears. "Just like his mother." The nurses eventually took Ethan for weighing and measuring. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, 21 inches long, perfect APGAR scores, while the doctor attended to Jessica. When they returned the swaddled baby to her arms, Ryan watched in awe as she gazed down at her son with a love so profound it seemed to radiate from her. "Would you like to hold him?" Jessica asked, looking up at Ryan. Ryan hesitated. "Are you sure?" Jessica nodded, carefully transferring the tiny bundle into Ryan's inexperienced arms. "Support his head," she instructed softly. Ryan cradled Ethan against his chest, marveling at how something so small could feel so significant. The baby's eyes opened briefly, seeming to look directly at him, and Ryan felt a connection snap into place, immediate, undeniable, and completely unexpected. "Hey, Ethan," he whispered. I'm Ryan, and I promise you something right now." He glanced at Jessica, who was watching them with tired eyes. "I promise I will always be there when you need me. Always." Jessica's eyes filled with fresh tears. "He'll hold you to that, you know." "I'm counting on it," Ryan replied, carefully returning Ethan to his mother's arms. Hours later, with Jessica dozing and Ethan sleeping in the bassinet beside her, fed, Ryan stepped into the hallway to call Sarah with an update. As he ended the call, a nurse approached him. "You should go home and get some rest," she advised kindly. "Mom and baby will probably sleep for a while now." Ryan shook his head. "I'm staying." The nurse smiled knowingly. "First-time dad jitters. Don't worry, they're in good hands here." Ryan didn't correct her assumption. Instead, he returned to the room, settling into the uncomfortable chair beside Jessica's bed. He watched her sleep, thinking about all the twists and turns that had led to this moment, all the mistakes and missed opportunities, the chance encounters and deliberate choices. Jessica's eyes fluttered open, finding him immediately. "You're still here," she murmured sleepily. "Where else would I be?" Ryan asked simply. Jessica's hand reached for his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Ryan," she said, her voice thick with emotion and exhaustion, "today, when I was in pain and scared, you were exactly who I needed you to be." Ryan brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "I'm trying to be that person every day now." Jessica's eyes drifted closed again, but her lips curved in a small smile. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm falling in love with you all over again." The words, spoken on the edge of sleep, might have been dismissed as the sentiment of an exhausted new mother. But as Ryan sat there holding her hand while Ethan slept peacefully nearby, he knew they were more than that. They were the truth, spoken in the raw vulnerability of one of life's most transformative moments. And in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the squeaking of nurses' shoes in the hallway, Ryan finally understood what it meant to be truly, completely present in the moments that mattered most. 3 weeks after Ethan's birth, a new rhythm had established itself. Ryan spent every available moment at Jessica's house, arriving early in the morning and often staying until Ethan's midnight feeding. He had arranged a flexible work schedule that allowed him to be physically present for much of the day, even if he sometimes had to work remotely from Jessica's dining table. The adjustment to parenthood was challenging for Jessica. The sleepless nights, the constant feeding, the physical recovery from birth. But Ryan's presence made the transition smoother than she had anticipated during her pregnancy, when she'd prepared herself for single motherhood. On this particular evening, Jessica sat in the rocking chair in Ethan's nursery, nursing him while Ryan prepared dinner in the kitchen. The sound of pots and pans and the aroma of something savory drifted up the stairs. It felt domestic, comfortable, as if they had somehow bypassed the awkwardness and uncertainty that should have accompanied their unusual situation. "Your daddy's quite the cook these days," Jessica murmured to Ethan, then caught herself. Ryan wasn't Ethan's father, not biologically, not legally. Yet increasingly, he was filling that role in every way that mattered. After Ethan finished nursing, Jessica carried him downstairs to find Ryan setting the table. "Perfect timing," he said, smiling at them. "Dinner's ready. Let me take him while you eat." Jessica transferred the drowsy baby to Ryan's arms, watching as he settled Ethan against his shoulder with practiced ease. 3 weeks, and Ryan already knew how to hold him, how to soothe him, how to change a diaper with minimal fuss. "You're good with him," Jessica observed, sitting down to the simple but delicious meal Ryan had prepared. Ryan smiled, patting Ethan's back gently. "He makes it easy. He's a good teacher." They ate dinner like this, Jessica with both hands, free Ryan with a baby on his shoulder, their conversation revolving around Ethan's development, Jessica's recovery, and the practical details of infant care. It wasn't until Ethan was sound asleep in his bassinet in the living room that they had a moment to discuss anything else. "My lease is up next month," Ryan mentioned casually as they cleaned the kitchen together. "I'm thinking of looking for something closer to here. The commute is getting old." Jessica paused, a plate half-dried in her hands. "That makes sense," she said carefully. Ryan dried his hands and turned to face her. "Jessica, we need to talk about what's happening here." Jessica set the plate down slowly. "What do you mean?" "This, us." Ryan gestured between them. "I'm here every day. I'm helping with Ethan. We're eating dinner together, making plans together." He took a deep breath. "In the hospital, when you were half asleep, you said you were falling in love with me again." Jessica's cheeks flushed. "I remember." "Did you mean it?" Jessica's eyes met his, vulnerability and certainty mingling in her gaze. "Yes." Ryan stepped closer. "I never stopped loving you, Jessica. Even when I was too blind to see what I was losing, somewhere inside, I loved you. And now, being here with you and Ethan, I know that this is what I want, not just for now, but for good." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Ryan, it's not that simple. I have Ethan to think about. What happens when the novelty wears off? When the long nights and the constant needs become too much? When your firm offers you another promotion that requires more hours, more travel?" "I've changed," Ryan insisted. "People don't change overnight," Jessica countered. "It hasn't been overnight," Ryan reminded her. "It's been months, and before that, 2 years of emptiness that taught me what really matters." He took her hands in his. "But you're right to be cautious. I haven't earned your complete trust yet, so let me prove it to you, day by day." Jessica squeezed his hands. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Let me move in," Ryan said. "Not as your husband, not yet, but as someone who wants to be here for both of you every day. As someone who wants to show you that the changes are real and permanent." Jessica withdrew her hands, creating space between them. "That's a big step." "I know," Ryan acknowledged, "and if you're not ready, I understand. I can get an apartment nearby and we can continue as we have been." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, her eyes thoughtful. "The guest room," she finally said. "You can use the guest room, for now." Relief and joy washed over Ryan's face. "Really?" "Really," Jessica confirmed. But Ryan, we need to be clear about something. Ethan isn't a project or a novelty. He's a lifetime commitment. And if you're going to be in his life like this, that has to be permanent. He can't get attached to you and then lose you if things don't work out between us. I understand, Ryan said solemnly. I'm not here temporarily, Jessica. I'm here for Ethan, and for you, for as long as you'll have me. Jessica nodded, a tentative smile forming. Then I guess we're doing this. As if on cue, Ethan began to fuss from his bassinet. Ryan moved to pick him up, settling the baby against his chest with natural ease. Hey, little man, he murmured. Did you hear that? We're going to be roommates. Jessica watched them, her heart full of a cautious hope. She wasn't naive enough to believe that every problem was solved or that the road ahead would be smooth. But standing in her kitchen, watching the man she had once loved and was indeed loving again comfort her son, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of this unlikely second chance. Your mom is very brave, Ryan continued his one-sided conversation with Ethan, and very wise. We're lucky she's giving us a chance to be a family. The word family hung in the air, a concept Jessica had imagined differently, but one that now seemed to be reshaping itself around the three of them, unexpected and yet somehow right. One day at a time, Jessica said softly, more to herself than to Ryan. One day at a time. Ryan looked up at her, his expression serious but filled with hope. That's all I'm asking for, the chance to show you, one day at a time, that some people really do change when what they stand to lose matters more than anything they might gain. Ethan cooed, his tiny hand finding Ryan's finger and gripping it with surprising strength. In that simple gesture, Jessica saw everything, past, present, and possible future, connected by the bond between a man who had learned to be present and a child who simply needed him to be. 1 year later, a light snow fell outside the morning brew cafe, dusting the sidewalks and creating a postcard-perfect winter scene. Inside, warmth and laughter filled the space as friends and family gathered to celebrate Ethan's first birthday. Marco had closed the cafe for the private event, decorating with blue balloons and a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Ethan." In the center of it all, Ethan sat in a high chair, his dark hair curling slightly at the ends, his cheeks flushed with excitement as he surveyed the crowd of adoring faces. Jessica stood nearby, chatting with Sarah and Marco's wife, looking relaxed and happy in a simple blue dress that matched her son's outfit. Ryan entered from the back room carrying a small cake with a single candle. The sight of him still made Jessica's heart skip, not with the painful recognition of that first encounter a year and a half ago, but with the comfortable certainty of knowing exactly who he was and who they were together. "Birthday cake coming through," Ryan announced, setting the cake on the tray of Ethan's high chair. The little boy's eyes widened with delight, his hands immediately reaching for the frosting. "Not yet, sweetie," Jessica laughed, gently catching his hands. "We have to sing first." The gathered friends and family, Marco and his wife, Sarah and her new boyfriend, Ryan's mother, Jessica's co-workers and neighbors who had become friends, joined in a somewhat off-key but enthusiastic rendition of Happy Birthday. Ethan bounced excitedly in his seat, recognizing that he was the center of attention even if he didn't understand why. "Make a wish, buddy," Ryan said, bending down next to the high chair. Ethan looked at Ryan with complete trust, then at Jessica, before reaching out with both hands to grab fistfuls of cake, much to everyone's amusement. "I think his wish was for cake," Jessica laughed, snapping photos with her phone. As the celebration continued, with Ethan happily smeared in frosting and guests mingling around the cafe, Ryan found a moment to pull Jessica aside. "Do you realize where we're standing?" he asked quietly. Jessica glanced around, realization dawning on her face. "This is where we saw each other again, right here by the counter." Ryan nodded. "I was getting coffee with Vanessa. You were working. I looked up, and there you were, pregnant and beautiful and completely terrifying." Jessica smiled at the memory. "I was so angry seeing you, so determined not to let you back into my life." "Thank God you failed," Ryan said, his voice teasing, but his eyes serious. "Thank God you were stubborn," Jessica countered. Ryan took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring he had placed there 3 months ago, a simple diamond that symbolized not a first beginning, but a second, more mindful one. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until we got home, but this feels like the right moment." He handed Jessica a small velvet box. Inside was a charm for her bracelet, a tiny silver coffee cup. "To remember where it all began," Ryan explained. "Or rather, where it began again." Jessica added the charm to her bracelet, which now held several: the original lion, a baby footprint for Ethan's birth, a house for when Ryan officially moved from the guest room to their shared bedroom, and now the coffee cup. "It's perfect," she said, then leaned in to kiss him softly. "Mom! Dad! Cake!" Ethan called from his high chair, his limited vocabulary deployed in service of his most immediate desire. Jessica and Ryan turned in unison, both responding to Ethan's call, Jessica as his mother by birth, Ryan as the father he had chosen to be and would soon make legal through adoption. "Coming, sweetie," Jessica replied, moving toward their son. Marco intercepted them, handing each a napkin. "Your son is the messiest cake eater I've ever seen," he commented with a fond smile, "but very happy. You've done well, both of you." Ryan looked around the cafe, at the people who had become their community, at the son who had brought them back together, and at the woman who had given him a second chance he hadn't deserved but had worked every day to earn. "We have," he agreed. "We really have." Later that night, after the party had ended and Ethan was sleeping peacefully in his crib, Ryan and Jessica stood in the nursery, watching their son's gentle breathing. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Jessica whispered. "If we hadn't run into each other that day," Ryan nodded. "All the time. I might still be that person, successful on paper but empty inside." He slipped his arm around her waist. "What about you? Do you ever regret letting me back in?" Jessica leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Not for a second." "Ethan needs you. I need you." She looked up at him. "The man you've become is the man I always knew you could be." As they quietly left the nursery, hand in hand, Ryan reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the mistakes, the loss, the unexpected reunion, and the daily choice to be present, to prioritize what truly mattered, to build something that would last. In the end, it wasn't about deserving a second chance. It was about recognizing it when it appeared and having the courage to reach for it, even when it seemed impossible. It was about understanding that sometimes the greatest success isn't measured in promotions or bank accounts, but in the quiet moments of genuine connection. A baby's laughter, a partner's trust, a family built on choice rather than obligation. And as Ryan followed Jessica to their bedroom, he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found what he'd been working for all along, not the trappings of success, but its essence, a life of purpose, presence, and love.